Here we are. Oh, sounds fine. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming to the session. Hope you're definitely in for a treat today. We've got some amazing panelists. Format is we're going to do a very quick 2-3 minute intro from each person, just to hear about their sort of experience in AI and their general thoughts. I'll go back and forth with a few questions, and then we'll probably leave half of the session for audience questions. So we'll just really make it dialogue-based and back and forth. This is a business leader session, but I was kind of looking at this as like the global council of AI, to be honest with you. I think one of the big things for me about AI is that it's equally distributed and that the opportunities are dispersed across the globe and not sort of concentrated into fewer and fewer hands. And I think this is an amazing panel to really navigate us through that. Way of introduction, my name is Mohammed. I run a company called QTA. We help companies launch and execute partnerships, particularly in the AI space, where pretty much every AI company is a partnerships company, and they need to find distribution models through existing businesses, and we specialize in that. I also look after the ex-Google network for the UK, so looking after around 5,000 ex-Googlers, ex-DeepMind staff. So a lot of the people who are leaving some of these companies and thinking about startups and what AI avenues they're going to go into, we spend a lot of time working with them on what ideas they should challenge and how to sort of get the funding up and running. Yes, let me just very quickly introduce the team that we have here today. So to my left we have Ren Ito, who's the COO of Stability AI, a partner at Solaris, and a senior fellow at NYU. We have Dr. John Lazar, CBE, who is the co-founder and general partner at Enza Capital, solving some of Africa's largest problems through technology, and really investing heavily in the space there. Also part of the board of Raspberry Pi, which I think is one of the UK's most proudest achievements when it comes to technologically enabling society. And then, last but not least, we have Fausto, Artico, global head of data science at GSK. I think when we're talking about AI and healthcare, I think medicine, especially personalized medicine, is one that completely blows my mind and I'm super excited about. So why don't I just give each person sort of 2 minutes to just introduce themselves, and then we can kick off with some questions.
Sure. I think, hi, my name is Ren Ito. I'm a partner of Solaris Fund Management. I already graduated from Stability, so no longer COO, but that's one of my investment target. I think it is difficult to confine my opening statement in 2 minutes, so bear with me for 4 minutes. But probably the starting point will be how I'm looking at the investment landscape in AI. So in a way which is in conjunction with how the business is developing right now. So my favorite analogy always I want to start with is maybe a software industry in the 1990s. So step 1, 2, and 3. There is a Windows operating system, Windows 95, whatever. Based on the operating system, you're developing application, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, whatever you name. And then the third layer is the enterprise solution, like Salesforce, Oracle. These guys can exist only because the operating system and application exists, based on which they're providing much more complex solution to the enterprise customers. My analogy in the AI, I'm using this analogy to apply it to the current status of AI. So everybody is excited about talking about foundation model, large language model. What is that? Is that step 1, 2, or 3? It's clearly step 1. The foundation model is the foundation of the potential AI solution. But foundation model itself is exactly the same as Windows 95. You buy Windows 95 getting so excited, what can you do? Unless you have a Word, Excel, PowerPoint, unless you have enterprise solution, it's still at the stage 1. So just wrapping up my opening statement, what I am looking at in the current investment and the business landscape is clearly identifying that what you are seeing and most excited about those major development in the AI is still at the stage 1 level. And then I can talk more about what kind of like trends I'm seeing in this industry. But that's clearly stage 1. And then we are now starting to see a lot more stage 2 companies bubbling up. It's either big infrastructure company, like which is working on the safety and security of the AI, which is providing some chatbot, which is providing some enterprise integration, but it's not stage 3 yet. The majority of the news we are seeing is stage 1. And we are starting to see some of the news coming up in stage 2, but we are still far from stage 3. I'll elaborate more in the next chance. John.
Thank you, Ren. That's incredibly helpful as a start. So the first thing I would say is that I'm not an AI practitioner at the moment. I'm sitting with 2 people here who probably know a lot more than I do. So let me start with that. My background, I'm a lot older than most people in the room. I did a postgraduate degree in natural language processing back in the 80s. The mainstream of my career is actually as a mainline software engineer. I spent 28 years at a company called Metaswitch building communication software. So think of me as a system software engineer and then a business guy. I stepped down from Metaswitch probably as CEO probably 5 or 6 years ago. The company's since been acquired by Microsoft, gone into the Azure group. So as Sal said at the beginning, I'm splitting my time now. I spend a good chunk of time with Enza Capital, so we're investing in early stage African companies using technology to solve larger meaningful problems. I chair the Raspberry Pi Foundation, so how many people in the room have played with the Raspberry Pi over the years? Quite a few. Incredibly exciting growth worldwide. The company's not intending to compete with NVIDIA, but we are now shipping a very, very large number of very, very cheap processors worldwide. And we're going to talk more about what that means in an AI context, but where we have open source AI models that can be run on low-end processors, you can see the promise for Raspberry Pi. And I'm most excited because we're now manufacturing little Raspberry Pi Picos, $5 a pop, in Kenya and Nairobi right now. So that's incredibly exciting worldwide. And then the final hat that I wear is I chair the Enterprise Committee at the Royal Academy of Engineering, where I'm a fellow. And that gives me visibility into a large number of companies who are spinning out from the top UK institutions, sort of deep-seated, very IP-rich, complex engineering. Many of those are AI companies. So just to add to what, I'd say 2 things just to add to Ren's opening statement. The first thing I'm super interested in, and this is incredibly important in the African context, is it's very easy to apply a European and Silicon Valley lens on AI and to think, well, we can take the best of Silicon Valley technology and apply it to African problems. And when you go into Africa and you deal with very smart, capable African entrepreneurs and engineers, the first thing they're going to go is, yeah, but that just doesn't work here. Context different. So I'm very, very interested in the application of these models to what I would say are difficult physical real-world situations. Like how does the software and the hardware and the reality coincide? And I think that's also very, very true of the work that I'm most interested in at the Royal Academy of Engineering, because some of the nitty-gritty that those companies are solving are real-world problems. So most interesting one, and I'll talk a little bit more about examples later, are how do you manage supply chains? Like real physical world stuff. And I think that's be interesting to have that conversation as we move forward. The second thing I would add, which I think is just adding to what Ren said, I don't know how many people in the room have read, there was a fantastic article that came out of Harvard Business School last month or 2 talking about jagged technological frontiers. And I think what we're seeing with AI and the speed with which it's moving, there's this kind of ferment, we'll talk about it, but what we actually have is we have this jagged frontier where within the frontier, we know stuff works. Outside the frontier, we don't actually know what's working. Like it's trial and error. It's very opaque. And that boundary is not moving in a kind of linear, straightforward way. It's shifting all the time. So Azim Azar, who's one of the best pundits on this, has written about the shifting, jagged technological frontier. And I think it's a really, really great way to think about it, because that frontier is also different depending on which part of the world you live in. And therefore, what you think may work here will not work in Africa. And I'll pause there. There's lots of stuff there for us to tee up to talk about.
Great. I'm Fausto. I have multiple PhDs, multiple master, one bachelor. I work for NVIDIA Corporation a short time in Silicon Valley after I moved to the IBM TJ Watson Research Center in New York, where I work also for the US government. And 6 years ago, I decided to move from deep tech to biotech. There was a position here for GSK in London. I moved. I'm global head of innovation data science. Built a lot of system and team from scratch, 0 to 1. Please ask me everything you want. And the same for the other panelists, because you will never again meet us all together. So this is your day to ask questions, okay? Nice to be here with all of you.
Before I pass it to the panel, I'll have a bit of me time as well. I've spent a lot of my sort of career helping and building solutions for small and medium businesses. Mm-hmm. And this kind of, I don't know how to feel about it. I kind of feel excited and elated, like, does this level the playing field? Or does this consolidate big companies' power and actually close smaller companies out? And I think even looking at a wider global scale, people say that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed. Is AI something that will narrow that gap and empower everybody, or is it going to be, a few winners?
So let me take up that question first. I think, so your question is interesting. But let me break down your question into the two different pieces. The one is like SMEs as the end users in between big developers and the customers. So SMEs could be utilizing the development of the AI technology to enhance its business, making more business opportunities, blah, blah, blah. But for me, that will happen only after, in my terminology, step 2 and 3 are complete or half complete. So the way I will be interpreting your question into the current setting, at this very snapshot of the moment, is what kind of SMEs can make a meaningful contribution or achievement in the current cycle of AI. I'd like to offer one negative and one positive view. Starting with a negative view. If I may draw your attention back again to the stage 1 of the development, which is like let's limit my scope to the language model, large language model. What is happening there is not necessarily a tailwind for SMEs, because the current way of making large language model is very simple. Bigger the data is, the better the performance is. Bigger the compute power is, better the performance is. There is just a very simple correlation between your input and output. This is the reason why you're already seeing 2 crystal clear winners as of now in the language model, which is OpenAI and Anthropic, whose valuation is like tens of billions of dollars. And the reason why they are raising like hundreds of millions of dollars or maybe $1 billion is they have to like acquire more data. They have to use more compute power to make better language model. Underneath the current recipe of transformer, if you have like 100 times smaller data and 100 times smaller compute power, however great your minor development is, you cannot compete with a big giant. So if I interpret your question first into how SMEs/startups day 1 startup can compete in the current setting, it is a very, very gloomy picture. But a positive one I'm seeing is, look at this transformer recipe, which is the bedrock of any AI development, any Gen AI development right now, which is already 6 years old, or maybe 7 years old. In terms of the technological cycle, this is a time for a new innovation. So what I would like to hope, what I am trying to find in the market right now is not the new startup of day 1 who is directly competing with OpenAI or Anthropic by using the same recipe. But I'm looking for those startups which is totally trying to use a different approach.
I guess, okay, if I take it really strip back the whole technology of it, I guess I'm looking at it as, is the pie getting split up or is the pie getting bigger? And if you take it at a super simple level, I have an accountant, one-man band. Is AI going to enable that individual to serve more customers, be more efficient and grow? Or will someone like Stripe just automate the whole process of accounting and not actually need that person to have a business? That's kind of what I'm getting at here, and interesting to hear a take.
Yeah, I think my answer, I share a lot of views with what Ren said there, but I think we genuinely don't know. I think we're in an absolutely fast-moving ferment. If you actually just look at what is happening just in the VC world right now, VC funding overall is dramatically down 23 versus 2022. AI funding is flat, but then if you break the AI funding down, you've seen generative AI funding go up like $3 billion to $18 billion just during 2023. I mean, it's an absolute bubble. And my previous experience having lived through multiple bubbles is we don't know what's going to come out the other side. So that's the first point. There will be some winners, and we don't know what those winners are going to look like. But I also think the whole space is so fast-moving. I mean, Ren is right. You're sitting there with GPT-4 at, 13 trillion tokens and massive compute. But around that, there's a whole lot of things which I'm still finding very hard to decode. So we've seen comments or reports that GPT performance has kind of gone down in the last 6 months as well as up, not as accurate as it was. We're still trying to work out how hallucinations actually happen and can we fix them. We've seen a dramatic uptake in open source work, so obviously very interesting watching Meta open source Llama and the effect of that. But I'm seeing, I just had a call with an African startup last week. This is on the coding side. There's a really, really active community around small models like Star Coder, which are running on smaller compute, where people are piling in and they're innovating. So there's a ton of open source stuff happening. Lots of improvements on token windows, and then this ferment in prompt engineering. So I don't know. I think we can talk about where I think sectors may happen. I think there's a lot of stuff happening on the small medium business side, and at this stage, I don't think we know what is coming out the other side.
That's a good point. Fausto, one for you. The medical world is amazing, but it's also not always been completely fair. I think people are finding out now that paracetamol doses for men versus women should be different. Underrepresented communities are using medicines and drugs that were never tested on them. What do you think the sort of AI landscape can add to the medical field, and particularly around personalized medicines? Do you think we'll ever get there where I can get a headache pill specifically for me, 3D printed? Like, where are we going with all of this?
That is the future, right? And generative AI for sure will help. I have very different views compared to Ren, but because I use a kind of different approach on how I see the problem, what I can tell you is that already now there are a lot of use cases in production using out-of-the-box capabilities that do not require the development of new models, where you can greatly increase productivity and streamline processes for a lot of different things. That is good. About a large language model, if you want to stay on that kind of philosophy instead of small-scale model, like Ren was describing, I think it will cost a fortune to create something like that for drug discovery. And the reason for that is, think about the human body. It's not like building a bridge. We know the technology to build a bridge for the last 200 years. Us as biological organisms are way, way more complex. So biology is much more recent discipline and science and field compared to mechanical engineering, number one. Number two, we don't have a lot of miniaturized nanosensors that are collecting a lot of data about you, right? And number three, classical computing will never work for that amount of data. We need quantum computing or something else. That is the reason why I'm saying yes. It would be great to have a 3D printer at home and do whatever we want with that 3D printer and have a personalized kind of cure on the spot for us. That horizon is more kind of 20 years down the road probably, if something not great is happening before. But we will get there, and I think a generative AI will help with that. And I'm very positive on how generative AI can help with that.
Can I just make a couple of comments on the medical side? So first, definitely the expert here, but there's two things that struck me about it. Number one, I was really struck with the drug discovery stuff. Obviously, it's moving super quick technically, but I think the one interesting side effect of COVID is that regulatory stuff's happening quicker as well. So I think we're in a mode where there will be drug discovery, which will also get signed off much more quickly. I mean, there was that. You probably know this better, a recent drug in the US that got signed off within a year by the FDA in terms of getting regulated. So that's interesting. I think the other thing that's, this goes to the heart of how we're going to work with these AIs. You probably all saw the sort of hype a couple of years ago that we'd never have radiologists anymore because obviously from an imaging point of view, AI are super effective. What's come out the other side right now, it seems to me, is much more of a collaborative approach where actually when you combine an AI with a practitioner, you get better results. And I was reading Nathan Benash's fantastic State of AI report, and there's a really interesting reference to a thing called CODOC, which is about reverting to clinical workflow, where you have an AI which breaks out to go back to a human clinician at the right point in the cycle to get the right results. So I think we're going to see those interesting combinations of things coming together. And that goes to the heart of the question of like, do these jobs just go away or do they change or how do they come together? And we can talk more about that.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I just spent the last week in Silicon Valley and went to a bunch of different VCs out there and was working with a bunch of startups, and what struck me was the amount of hardware technologies that are really taking off right now. Like, it seems like SaaS isn't really a thing now. It's like everyone is racing to build the other pieces of the pipe. And it sort of hit me, and it's like we've only really got one part of this right now, like the AI. But when you mix the AI with the robotics, with Internet of Things, sensors, beacons, cameras, it completely changes like what we know, the amount of data we get, the collection, the application of it. Like, what opportunities do you see there when all these pieces get joined together?
Okay, I go first here. So you're right, Sal. I don't know how many of you were here yesterday when Nigel was giving the talk, right? I don't think many people really grasp what he was meaning with molecular chips. I think that what he was really meaning is biological chips, okay? So when I had to move here, I almost got a job at Graphical, but I decided to work for GSK. And we were very aligned in the sense that, if you remember, Nigel yesterday was talking about the human brain and how essentially he's taking principles from nature, because nature is the most energy efficient, let's say, machine or entity that we have to do some kind of computations. So in future, yes, you're right. Today we see this kind of trend from semiconductors that are investing billions just to create a chip. In fact, when I was talking with Jensen 7 years ago at his house, he was saying, building the next chip is costing me $2 billion. We cannot sustain that kind of investment, right? And what do you do in biotech? What you do in biotech is really using living organisms to produce drugs, to ferment processes, to transform things from one way to another space. That is the reason why in future probably we will start to have hybrid systems, bio plus in silico systems. And I was at Puzzle X the previous year, and finally they got there somehow. They were showing like silent suspensions with some in silico was learning to play Pong in 5 minutes. That is way more energy efficient than other things that are fully in silico, and is really going to open some very interesting possibilities. You are perfectly right. Everything runs in hardware, so why we don't use nature to run whatever kind of compute we need, for example. I think that in future we will see some very interesting things where we are much less artificial and in silico based, and we will interface much more with natural elements present in the environment.
Yeah, I think that's fascinating, actually. Really, really interesting. And I mean, just from a Raspberry Pi point of view, it's been absolutely extraordinary seeing the number of embedded chips that we've sold for industrial purposes over the last year. So it's clearly just this huge growth. I think the area where I'm most interested in terms of investment and companies and what's happening in the sort of enterprise world is pulling that all together is going to take what people are now beginning to talk of as LLM ops. So it's the equivalent of, how do you do DevOps in a world where you've just got this extraordinary amount of stuff that you're putting together. So this goes all the way to, how do you ingest all the data? How do you curate it? How do you annotate it? How do you create vector databases from all of it? How do you then deploy it? The LLM is only one small piece of it, and how do you fine tune it, and etc. And then all the security and all the so if you imagine you're a large enterprise trying to do all of this stuff, it's a totally new discipline, and I think that's fascinating. And huge acquisition recently of Mosaic ML by Databricks. Really good example of what I think is going to happen in that space. So I'm really interested in that because I think that's where, coming out the other side of this, we're going to see something.
Let me try answering the same questions in a slightly differentiated manner. And in order to do that, let me share with you the colors I am adding to this question. So in my profession, I can be either a short-term investor or long-term investor. But at least I have to identify what is this, the technology I'm investing in is producing results in 3 years or 10 years. So what the Fausto said is amazing, because Fausto, you were using this the drug as one of the examples to apply the AI into. My question is always how soon you can see the tangible results. Even half cooked way, that's fine. But John, you said clearly AI is in the bubble. I agree. But my interpretation of bubble is not just in the financial sense, but also in the sense of how people are perceiving the AI. Whenever we are talking about AI, we are talking about a very, very distant future. It could be, the speed to reach distant future could be faster than the internet period of time. So I don't know. The distant future could happen in 5 years, 3 years, 2 years, I don't know. But at least, with a very simple analogy of combining AI and drug making, mixing up, boom, you get some results. This is, for me, something like a distant future. And my keyword will be maybe like a last 1 mile or last 1%. Let me use another analogy, another example. If you are using AI to enhance the call center operations, it's a very direct application of using your customer data and language model, mixing up. You can replace the human operator. But the question is, what is the preciseness? What is the accuracy? If the accuracy is, if the accuracy is below 90%, for example, you have to still use a lot of human intervention. That is too far from replacing human operation by the AI.
Yep.
AI might be able to assist the human, but it's far from the future which we are envisaging. The question is, what is the acceptable error rate depending on the industry? Maybe in the customer's call center operation, if you reach the 99% accuracy, that's it. You don't have to make it even more perfect than 99.9%. Maybe in a drug development, you need more. So this is a kind of like the angle I will be prioritizing in looking at this question. And going back to your question, Sal, your observation in the Silicon Valley last week is really, really relevant. And the reason why my observation is the reason why you're seeing a lot more hardware companies as opposed to software companies are popping up might be related to this accuracy thing. Maybe like it is easier or maybe it's a lower hanging fruit to make something 99.9% perfection, at least in that domain, in the space of the hardware.
Super interesting. Oh, all those takes are really interesting.
Can I just add one comment, because I thought what Ren raised there was really interesting. So I think my thinking on this goes to the heart of how you think about what to invest in, what's going to happen. My thinking has shifted slightly on, the promise of AI. We all have this kind of very nirvana view or very apocalyptic view that it's going to be, AI is going to come in and take all these jobs and it's going to completely replace humans. I think I've kind of shifted on that. Really, really interesting paper by Agrawal on the notion of sort of automation versus augmentation, which I think is like super interesting. But if I come back to that Harvard Business Review article that I mentioned, I was very, very struck by the way they're framing it, because I think it's going to be much more the case that we are not going to just see jobs disappear, being completely replaced. What we're going to see is an evolution where if you take those jobs and you break them down into the individual tasks, we're going to see a collaboration between human and AI on individual subtasks, which is going to then shift the overall frame of what those jobs look like. So I think we're in a stage where some jobs will go, some jobs will stay, but it's an overall evolution of how that all hooks together. And very, very nice analogy. People are talking now about, is it centaurs? In other words, it's a half human, half horse, where there's this kind of, I'll delegate this whole thing to you from the human side to the horse. Or is it more like a cyborg, where on a very, very granular subtask level, you're actually working super close with the AI on some things, and the job then evolves as you come out of that. So, it's a very, very unclear position as to how this is all going to evolve when you've got a jagged technology frontier.
It's crazy. Let me open up to some questions, and we can just bounce around from there. Anyone have a question? We'll just take one at a time. Maybe we'll wait for the microphone. If you could, just introduce yourself as well.
Oh, okay. Vasily, I have a question for Ren. You said that now the opportunities for SMEs in the AI space are limited because of the sheer power that is needed, to train LLMs, to maintain LLMs, and to run LLMs. And I was thinking, what's your perspective on what we heard some talks on yesterday about smaller models trained on a higher precision data that can, kind of not as impressive as, I don't know, ChatGPT, but still do the small function better than large language models?
Right. Thanks for the question. I think what I believe is making a generic, in the space of making a generic language model, if I take the risk of overly simplifying, I still believe that the chance for the SME is getting slimmer and slimmer and slimmer. But what you have said is probably closer to more industry-specific or company-specific application. That layer, you're absolutely right. Because if you are fine-tuning whatever language model, either you buy from the closed source or you just use from the open source, and you're fine-tuning this model with your own proprietary data. It doesn't require too many of the data sets. It doesn't require too much of the electricity or the compute power. That's still doable. But the question is, how scalable that is. Because if you're thinking about my own Papa Mama Shop bakery, and I am using whatever open source language model and matching it with my bakery data and providing a customized solution to my own bakery operation. Yes, it doesn't require too much of the data or too much of the electricity or the compute power. But probably what you potentially as an SME owner or the startup owner trying to achieve is making sure that your business application has as large addressable market as possible. And in order to do that, I think that is a bottleneck. So maybe like you might want to replace my example of Ren Ito's bakery shop into UK-wide Bakery Association, so that your addressable market is getting larger and larger and larger. Where do you getting that data from? And if you have to train more data, if you have to train the model with a lot more data, training cost is going up. So one of the examples, I am not entirely pessimistic about the role of the SMEs even now. What I am seeing is how you can find the way to add your value by not consuming too much compute power, which is using so some of the language, some of the technology, like infrastructure. If you want to develop infrastructure which address the hallucination question, most likely you have to develop your own language model so that that safety hallucination mechanism works hand in hand with this language model, so that this will be returning the best solution. So I think this kind of technology development, I think it's hard to avoid developing your own language model, meaning hard to avoid using too much of the compute power. But if you come up with some other solution, which is energy efficient, I think that is an area where the SMEs will flourish.
I think it's important to distinguish between will an SME go off and be able to compete with a large language model? I mean, I think Ren's right, but I think there are just so many applications right now where we're seeing incredible creativity with startups focusing on the requirements of small and medium business and producing like incredibly interesting solutions. I mean, to just like super current examples, conversation with a startup yesterday that's in stealth mode still, and I can't name them. They're focusing really, really hard on the sell side. How do you build a solution to help a small and medium business sell into a large corporation? And they are ingesting all the data that's coming back from the corporation, RFPs, Q&A, and they're pulling that all together, and they're completely reshaping the way that a sales team runs selling into those things. It's like really straightforward, but incredibly powerful. So that's one. The other one I think is really, really interesting is I think we're going to see a big ferment in the kind of Shopify space. So this is how do you equip a small and medium business to go out and build e-commerce. Incredibly powerful that we can now talk to a large language model using voice, image, and text. Because if you imagine creating a solution where, you know, I'm a small medium owner, I'm a 5-person shop, and I need to put the end-to-end go-to-market together, I can just do that super quick. So I think those are applications which are going to just change the world very fast.
My question? Got.
No, wait. My 2 cents for you.
Come on.
Okay. Is how critical is the problem? Doesn't mean that problem needs to be big. Number one, for you as researcher. Number two, there is always the mistake that people want to go and become a unicorn. You don't need to be a unicorn. What I'm trying to emphasize is that Google and those companies need to create services that are targeting a big market with a huge capitalization. If you go to target a market of 400 million pounds, it's too small for that. So if there is nobody there, it's all yours. Okay, think in this way. But you need to have context. If you don't have context, you need to talk with somebody for the bakery, and the reality is that you can discover that at a mathematical level you can solve that problem that doesn't work only for bakery, work also for shipment. I'm editing it up, and after, because they give you their data, if the data is more but solve something critical for a market capitalization that is not enormous, you have the market for you, and Google is not going to come after you. Okay.
Got one there, then we'll come to you next. No, do you want to? Yeah.
Right. Oh, thank you. Hi. My question is for Fausto, actually. And you mentioned that you went to GSK and built the data science function from 0 to 1. And I think for many businesses, sort of understanding how you sort of the journey that you went on, things that you thought were key to the success of that program, and what your next frontiers might be in terms of challenges you're tackling.
And start something on my own. That is a possibility. I'm going to have a lot of fractional roles where I'm helping other early startups that do not understand the mechanics and the dynamics of pharma or deep tech or other things to explore opportunities. I'm creating huge and normal informal networks of people so that I can do pattern matching and create opportunities around the world. Those are the things where I feel now I'm leading to. I did those things several times in different ways inside big companies. Now I want to try to move and transition and decide with who I want to work, how I want to work, on what I want to work, and that is probably the direction that I'm going to take. That there are simply some dynamics in my mind where big companies have a lot of power, a big distribution network, and a lot of capital. But to change the culture of those companies, or even if the people are very good, due to effects of the organizational structure, things need to happen in a different way. How I see the future, and we go back to, again, startups, I think the future is bright. Never like before, we had so many opportunities for each of us to create something unique and be creative and do what we like. So how I see the future, even if I don't know how quickly it will happen, is, yeah, there will be always big players. It's normal. But I really think there are opportunities to create partnership ecosystems among small companies where each one is in a specific part of that ecosystem, and the barrier to entry is created essentially because you have that kind of ecosystem of partnership working together where everybody can thrive and develop change in a way that is much faster than what is possible today for a company that is 300 years old, subjected to a lot of regulations and forced to use already systems that it bought before, regulations that were there before, and so on. So I think both big companies and small startups have an utility. What I hope is that we will move much faster in try to make things to work between ourselves. That is what I hope. And I feel that I want to do.
We've got another question. Just yeah.
Please hold it away from your face.
Angie French, and I'm ex-Meta. John, you mentioned Llama, Meta's large language model, and that is open source. And I wondered your thoughts on the role that open source will play in the development of that jagged frontier.
Yeah, I think it's moving super quick, so that's a great question. I think Meta's decision to open source Llama is very interesting. It's a very different approach from the way the other, and I don't really understand. I think Ben Thompson wrote a piece about this last week, so anybody who reads Stratechery, go and read his analysis on why Zuckerberg chose to do it. So interesting sort of business choices. I think it's been very powerful. The area I'm most engaged with, just in terms of software engineering, is how functional code Llama is. I mean, it's amazing, generating code. So that's been very, very powerful. I think the one limitation on it right now is there's open source and there's open source, right? So as you know, there's a whole spectrum of what the licensing agreement looks like. And there are actually some limitations on how Llama is allowing itself to be deployed. So I have seen a bunch of people involved in the open source space actually moving towards using things which have a much, much more permissive license. So, I mentioned StarCoder earlier. I think a lot of African technology people are moving towards StarCoder, and Hugging Face, a really interesting company, are putting together quite interesting projects as well on the open source side, which are completely permissive licenses. So I think when you look at that space, what you've actually got to do is you've got to break it down, and you've got to go and look at what the license actually looks like. But there's a lot. So I think my final was to say, look, I don't really know. There's just this kind of amazing amount of stuff happening, everybody piling in, don't know, but it's very, very fast moving. And the most interesting thing that will come out the other side, which we've talked about, is how much of that stuff will run on just regular compute, and which can be tuned in limited ways, but it's running on regular compute.
I think that's a great wrap-up. We don't know, it's fast-moving, super exciting. Thank you very much for the time.